Well, good morning. And it is a beautiful day. Go out and enjoy it. And don't just drive around. Go for a walk. If you don't know where to walk, nice, safe walk at the back of the East Fishkill Rec area. You go down to the library, park in the lower parking lot behind the library, and go down the hill towards where the creek is. And there's a little trail that winds through the woods. Beautiful walk. Safe, unless you're afraid of deer. So, enjoy it. Lots of things going on. This is the last Sunday in October, but you have a whole week left of October. So, pay attention to the rest of the month. But November's calendar is available. So next Sunday is November 1st. And that brings up some important news. Because starting yesterday, running through November 1st, are early voting days. So if you have not voted yet, or if you were wondering about it, for most of us, the nearest election site for early voting is the town of Fishkill, Town Hall. After that, you have to go to Poughkeepsie. There's 2 places there, or then Millbrook, and then Rhinebeck. I do not know about Putnam. So, town of Kent, okay. Otherwise, wait till November 3rd on election day.
And don't try it on the weekend. We were in line for an hour yesterday and left. It was a 4.5-hour line in Fishkill.
Well, speaking of that, pay attention to the times. They've made this just about as easy as possible for government bureaucrats. So today it's 12 to 5, tomorrow 9 to 5, Tuesday 12 to 8, Wednesday 9 to 5, Thursday 12 to 8, Friday 9 to 5, Saturday 9 to 4, and next Sunday 12 to 5. You got that? Election day 6 to 9. Go figure. So there's the election news, and with regard to that, who's on the ballot? We have president. There are 5 people running for president. The list is in the back. For Congress, District 18, our current congressman is Sean Patrick Maloney. Running against him is Sheil Farley and Scott Smith. You can look on their websites to find out about them, and I encourage you to do that. And I can make copies of this list if you're interested in it. For Congress, District 19, because that covers most of us here, either 18 or 19, Antonio Delgado, Stephen Greenfield, Kyle Vandewater, and Victoria Alexander. Those are the candidates for U.S. Congress, the House of Representatives. There are no senators being elected this year. State Senate, Democrat Karen Smythe and Republican Sue Serino for District 41. If you're in a different district, you need to check and see who you have. For State Assembly, District 105, Laurette Giardino and Kieran Lawler are the candidates. State Supreme Court, Rich Gerken is the only name I could come up with, but I understand from Kimberly, who got her absentee ballot and could see the ballot, there were a bunch of others. I don't know how you could even find them out. I tried. But they do not make it easy. And what kind of issues do you look at? is the Supreme Court, that's a judge, just like county court judge. That's not supposed to be a political office, so you don't vote Democrat or Republican, I should think, but apparently you do. And so, you're going to have to do some homework there. For county court judge, there's 2 for Dutchess County, Jessica Segal and Peter Foreman. Peter Foreman is the present one. He's running for re-election. So there's the list. I'll put that out on the back table if you need to know who is your candidate. And she's allowed to sing. Okay? Don't mind at all. Then there's some news for you. The Northeast Regular Baptist Fellowship of Churches is still alive and well, even though this year we didn't have either our spring or fall Bible conference. In the news, in our fellowship, we have different degrees throughout the New England area of COVID shutdown. One church at least is not meeting at all yet, but most of us are. And according to this, many are almost back to a normal worship time. Well, we are, but in the churches, there's been a various reaction to the COVID health-wise. As far as we know, there's been some that have had the virus but recovered from it. One person, an elderly member at New Boston, passed away from it. Others have been affected with different degrees of severity, but have recovered. One fellow over at Burnham Baptist up in Maine, he had the virus, had a heart attack, and is home gaining slowly. He's 102. So try to get CNN to do an interview with him. Churches that need pastors still, New Life Community in Providence, Rhode Island, Northfield Baptist in Massachusetts, and First Baptist in Rowley, Massachusetts. We have a new pastor in Augusta Baptist, Maine, Riverside Drive Baptist, Maine, and First Baptist in Enfield, Connecticut. So we've got new pastors there, and we're excited about that. And the church up in West Stewartstown, New Hampshire, was Independent Baptist Church, is now Hope Baptist Church. They changed their name. And the Shatneys, many of you know Wayne and his wife, they are rejoicing. They have their 8th great-grandchild. So Everleigh, Everleigh, Everleigh Rose Hanson, to their granddaughter Coralie, which is Roy Kinney's daughter. So that's the NRBFC news. And then there's a new letter from the Hunters in South Africa. They're rejoicing. Their son Caleb is now engaged, and he's having some success with families, although there's some needs. Like any ministry, he's working with people who have a lot of needs. There's some extreme poverty in his area versus extreme wealth, very little middle ground, and very little interaction between the two groups, which is typical in Africa. And then there's a lot of alcohol abuse and other cultural things that make it difficult to minister the gospel, which of course regulates how you live morally and how your family is structured. And so those are challenges that missionaries have always had to face around the world. And then we got a letter from Kimberly, her newsletter. She and Cody have done an associate membership at the Bethel Baptist Church, and I know the pastor there, which is interesting. But they're settled in their apartment, and they have some pictures here, and they're talking about what they're doing. They've gotten to know some folks. She started her teaching English to speakers of other languages. She started her actual major classes on that, and she's really interested. She's had to teach several times. She says one of the times the two other girls in my class and I each had to prepare a short 15-minute lesson. When we got to class, our teacher gave us each a flexibility handicap in order to challenge us to adapt to unexpected circumstances. Okay? So you have your lesson prepared, and you have a surprise flexibility handicap thrown on you. For Kimberly, it was a power outage. And the entire lesson had to be done in the dark. Thankfully, I was allowed to keep my computer plugged in as long as I pretended the battery hadn't died yet. Her whole lesson was based on a PowerPoint. Well, what happens if you're overseas and the power goes out? You know, we're so accustomed to lights. That is not the case in much of the world. So, and then Cody's working, and they're rejoicing at being able to visit with people, and they're asking prayer for as they grow together, as they serve in their church, and as they think towards a missions trip for this coming summer. So, there's that. And then, let's see here. Okay, I think that's it for those things. Otherwise, next Sunday.
Did you get a notice from Josh and Alyssa?
No.
They have to do, they're not quarantined.
They're going through pretty much the same thing as we're going through, but some cases they're only allowed like 6 people in the house for the startup churches, and if neighbors will turn and basically see more, they suspect it was sick. So they're doing all right, but they've got some issues over here.
Yeah. Well, see, we're fortunate here. Our neighbors wouldn't dare do that because all of our neighbors have more people in their houses every day than we do here. And you saw that house on Townsend Road yesterday that, you know, there's like 12 cars in the driveway. But yeah, that's happened in other countries too, and it's awful. That's the government's forcing people to turn against these. This is what happens in those communist countries, and people say, "Oh, give us more." Anyway, thank you for sharing that. So keep the booths in your prayers. Next Sunday, it's the first Sunday of the month, so it's our Lord's Supper and our Bible reading with lunch together. I know we just did it last week, but that was a special case. We're back to the regular schedule. So first Sunday of the month, lunch together and our Bible reading service. The chapters are back there on the table. We're going to finish up the book of Matthew. There's some big chapters in the book of Matthew at the end there. So if you like a big challenge, Britt, or if others want to split one up and share it, do a tag team reading, be creative. If somebody wanted to dramatize a chapter, sound effects, crowd noises, and you wanted to record, get together, work on a recording and play that as we'll go for it. See Rachel, she can coordinate it. She's got all kinds of... do be mindful that the COVID-19 thing is still perceived to be an issue. Be careful. And even when it's no longer perceived, let alone declared, it's still a good idea to wash your hands frequently. Never mind COVID, it's flu season again. cover your cough, wash your hands. Those are courtesy things. That's not frantic or frenetic, overboard stuff. That's courtesy. And with the coming election, be praying, but make sure more than the importance it is to vote is the importance it is to behave well. Honor God. You are representatives of the Lord Jesus Christ, and your speech and your comments should be uplifting. It's hard. We're accustomed to being cynics or snide or irreverent. We should not be accustomed to that. We should work at changing that. So do be careful how you speak. Pray for me that I be careful. And as I pray for you. Ben? Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Donna. As we work through Paul's letter to the Ephesians, a wonderful letter, similar in content to Colossians, some slight differences and a different emphasis, though much of the content is similar. My purpose with you through this book is to help you manage in these times we're in right now. Whether it's the concerns about the COVID disease or other illnesses that plague us, but the COVID seems to be a universal concern for people. Many people are very much afraid of it, or They've been taught to be afraid, but they're not sure what they're afraid of. Am I to be afraid of some disease that lurks like leprosy? Or am I to be afraid of people? Imagine what's happening in our culture with generations of youngsters who are growing up not seeing people's faces. Being taught that stranger danger is doubled down now. Anybody is a stranger to stay away from. So think about that, you who are grandparents or want to be parents or grandparents someday. How are you going to manage in an environment like that? And then there's the political situation. We've been relatively isolated here, but down in New York City, there are regular riots still. You don't hear about them as much anymore because it's getting too close to election day. And besides that, after you've heard about 14 different riots, a 15th riot is not news anymore. Kind of like another fire in California. Oh, there's another fire in California. Never mind that it's burning thousands of acres and hundreds of homes and displacing people. It's another fire. It's kind of like another earthquake in the Philippines or wherever. We kind of just blow that off. But there are cities around us that are burning. And people are aware of that, and it unsettles them. And so I want you to listen to a little scenario. It's like a dialogue, something we need dramatized. So maybe with a little more time, we could work something out like this, okay? Because it would be more effective than me just reading it to you. Because it's like the 14th riot, there's Pastor again. So here's the situation. Two people are talking. The first one goes up to the second one and says, "What's the matter?" "I'm anxious, I'm worried, I'm fearful." "Well, why?" "Well, because things seem unsettled." "Well, how so?" "Well, everything's gone crazy. It's all out of control. Look at the politicians. They're just screaming at each other. They're not even talking about government. Or the government itself doesn't seem to know what to do. And then there's this disease everywhere you look. There's more disease and new disease and horrible things. And then there's riots. Look at the weather. The weather's gone nuts. And the schools. How are we ever going to educate our children? And on it goes. And so then the first person says, well, what is it you want? You see all this distress. What is it you want? Well, the narrator looking on, or the observer, notices now there's a hesitation. Because when you do that, or when I do that, when we react like that, most times the person we're doing it to does not ask the question, well, what is it you want? They'll usually say, yeah, you're right, or it's not so bad. They'll say one or the other of those things, but they won't ask you, what do you want? And if they did, most of us wouldn't know how to answer. Because that's not what we're thinking. Or we would say something like this, back to our little scenario. So what is it you want? Well, I want it all to stop. I want people to be civil, to love one another. I want things to be normal. I don't want all this turmoil. Okay. When do you want it? Right now? Right now, of course. Well, what do you think could effect such a sweeping change? Politicians, government, disease, riots, weather, school. What could effect such a sweeping change? Well, God should do something. Okay, now we get that far, and we find ourselves in Ephesians, where God says he has done something. No, I don't mean what God already did. I mean, hold it right there. Are you about to tell God that he's mismanaged? That he has not done the job right? Or that the job he has planned is not sufficient according to you? See, that's what we have to be very careful of. Because that's what we think. And we are in effect blaming God for the situation around us because we believe he has the power to do something about it, and we think he has not done something about it, or at least not to our satisfaction. And that raises you up above God. And that's a wrong thing to do. We need to change our thinking. And that's why I've been taking you through this book of Ephesians, to force you to evaluate the way you think and then to change your thinking. Because God has done something. He has put a plan in place. He has told us about the way things will be. And now we see things being the way God said it, but we are not content to read the rest of God's plan and wait on it. And that's what we need to do. God does not need to change. God cannot change. We need to change. And when we change, we find that we're then able to live and be satisfied. So what is it that God did? Well, the first thing he did was in ages past determined to save you and set up a plan for that to happen. In Ephesians chapter 2, which is where I'd like you to look right now. Now, we talked about that great work that we're supposed to do, that we've been created in Christ Jesus for. And those wonderful verses that we love to quote about that it's not by works of righteousness which we have done, and things of that sort. It's not of our own doing, that nobody should boast. We love to quote those. But we're not so familiar with the general context of those passages. And as the writer, Paul, is speaking to the Ephesians who are in some kind of turmoil, but remember what Paul is in while he's settling down these anxious people. Paul is in prison under an atheistic, I take that back. The Romans were not atheistic, but they were not believers in God. They worshiped false gods, and they resisted and violently many times believers in God, hence Paul's position in prison. It wasn't actually because the Romans said it's illegal for you to worship God, but because Paul's worship of God created a disturbance, Paul was arrested. Not the ones who caused the disturbance, but Paul was blamed for it. And that's what's happening in our situation today, many cases. Well, it's your fault that we're in turmoil. And so therefore, if you stop believing in God, if you get rid of Jesus Christ, then things will settle down. You know that that's true? If we all shut up and turned out the lights and went home and closed our Bibles, a lot of things on earth would settle down. Because there would be no more need for Satan to fight. But as long as somebody's got the lights on, somebody's going to complain that it's in their eyes. That's what's happening. In chapter 2, after those great, wonderful memory verses that we love, look at verse 11. Therefore, remember. Now, to keep in mind or to have on your mind any whatever term is used in your version, the Greek word is the word we get remember from. And in fact, if you're going to study sociology or how people think or psychology, those little tricks that you use as memory aids, the technical term for those is just that Greek term. Mnemonics, the little memory tricks. So when you make an acronym like Galatians, Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, how do you remember those? Grandma eats potato chips. Okay, that's how you keep those in order. Or whatever other little trick you use. The technique is this Greek word. It's a memory aid. So Paul says, having told them people that they are created in Christ Jesus to do good works, he says, remember that at one time, and look at this list, you were separated from Christ. You were alienated from the commonwealth. That's the people of Israel, the chosen body that God had set apart from the rest of the world in order to do two things: reveal himself to the world and draw the world to himself. That's what Israel was for and is for. And Gentiles, this is specifically the audience that Paul is writing to, were alienated from that. And when we talk about that word alienated, we don't just mean that they didn't know about it. They were in some other island somewhere in the ocean and they never made it to the United States. It's not that kind of alien. It's alienated like, we don't want you here. You don't belong here. You are not a participator in this. You're not on our team. Go away, kind of alienated. So you were separated from Christ. Think about that for a minute. Who's Paul writing to? He's writing to Gentile believers. And when he says you were, past tense, separated from Christ, what time period is he talking about? Now remember, this is within 25 years of the resurrection. Jesus of Nazareth was revealed to be the Christ 25 years before Paul wrote this. But Paul is referring to ancient history. You, Gentiles in the flesh, called the uncircumcision by what is the circumcision, which is made in the flesh by hands. Remember that you, at that time, were separated from Christ. He's talking about since Moses. Now, how were they separated from Christ? Because they weren't circumcised. Does circumcision make you a Christian? No. What's he talking about? Where was Christ? Was there such a thing as a Messiah in all the Old Testament? Yes, there was. You remember in the gospel when Jesus catches up with the folks going on their way to Emmaus after the resurrection? And beginning with Moses, he showed them that the Christ must suffer. So there was a concept, there was an understanding. That's why Simeon and Anna were standing in the temple, waiting for the Christ when Mary and Joseph brought the baby in to be dedicated according to the law. That's why Zacharias and Elizabeth, and why Mary wasn't shocked. She was shocked that she was the one picked, but she wasn't shocked at the idea was anticipated. And so Paul's telling these Ephesian believers that they have been separated, they were alienated, and he's reminding them of that. Look at that. This is what your condition was. You had no hope, he says. And you were without God. Atheos. We get atheist from that. Without God in the world. That's what you were. And you're asking me God should do something? What's God doing about this situation in the world? That's what he did. He saved you. So there they were. There you were. You were the same way, by the way. You were separated from God. You were alienated from the commonwealth. And if you object and say, wait, no, I never was because I was saved when I was a little kid. You were what when you were a little kid? You were saved when you were a little kid? What were you saved from? What danger were you in? Oh, you mean the wrath of God? That kind of thing? Oh, well, that. You were saved from the wrath of God. Why did you need to be saved? Because you were separated from Christ and you were alienated from the commonwealth of Israel. And you had to come to him, but you couldn't do that on your own. But God saved you. So now have you got that picture in your mind? Okay. Are we all there? As we say, are we all on the same page? We'd like you to listen to this little statement from a writer, F.F. Bruce, on this passage. He says, the privileges now enjoyed by Gentile believers in Christ would be appreciated all the more gratefully if they bore in mind the state of life from which they had been delivered. Now, what's that mean? Back to our little scenario. You're sitting there wringing your hands because politicians, the government, the disease, the riots, the weather, the schools, whatever it is, Have you forgotten that you were rescued from death to live forever with a holy God? What do you even care about the weather? What do you care about who becomes president? What do you care about whether we keep this building or not? You know what's going to happen if the government takes this building away from us, or if the weather destroys it? If Lisa was here, she could tell you. Do you know how much we pay for the alarms and for the electricity and for the insurance and for the inspections? You know how many inspections we have to have every year? Ask the deacons and trustees. You know, when we have the fire safety inspector come over here, it's $75 per building to have him come and look and tell us that the light out there on the exit thing is dim. $75 a building. And then we have to pay for whatever new thing. I had to put a little label on the furnace door downstairs. It calls it a furnace room. I mean, open the door and look, you'll see it's a furnace room. Why does it need a label on it? Do you even know there's a furnace room downstairs? You would if you didn't have a furnace. But all of that, all of a sudden now we wouldn't have to spend any of that money. That's the worst thing that would happen if we lost all of this. Oh, but they might take it away from us. So they can have it. What would they do with it? If we abandon this, by the way, we have a dissolution clause in our Constitution. Maybe you don't know that. Go back and read your Constitution. There's a dissolution clause that's required for a nonprofit organization, that when you stop, whatever assets you have to be distributed in a certain way. The members of the organization don't get to divvy it up. We don't get to sell our 4+ acres and the building and all that, and then everybody get a nice little Christmas bonus. That's not how it works. We have to give it away. Okay? So, but if we do that, one of the things that happens is, see, this is not zoned residential. Now the town has a problem. And if we give it away to another 501c3, it stays off the tax roll. So it's not a benefit to the town in any way. Now we can sell it, they can rezone it and turn this into a house or a store or something. But then they wouldn't be allowed to operate because the parking lot's deficient, there's only one bathroom, all that stuff. So anyway, what's the big problem? We get so caught up in trivia, non-essential trivia, that we think is so important. And we forget that God has done something and He is planning to do something. So we ask to start with, what's the matter? And God says, remember when? And up through verse 12, He reminds us what? And then verses 13 through the rest of that chapter, we find out what happened. Something happened. Remember when, Paul says? And then he tells us something happened, starting with verse 13. What happened? You have been brought near. Well, so what? You ask. Well, when you were brought near, that's where the safety comes from. If you're at sea and you fall overboard and somebody notices and has the wherewithal to do something about it, they put down a boat. And the boat comes by. And what does the boat expect you to do if you're able? climb aboard. Come on over here. Swim towards us and we'll row towards you. You'll drown or get eaten by a shark. There's danger out there. Come here. That's what safety is. When God brought you near, if you dare to say, well, so what? You're still not addressing my concerns, Pastor. Well, there are enemies out there. Some of that is what you're perceiving in your hand wringing. The wicked politicians, or the corrupt government, or the unpleasant neighbors, or the disease, or whatever it might be. Those are real enemies. You come near to Christ, and what does God then do to those enemies? Well, that's the whole problem. He hasn't done anything. Well, that's where we get back to our little scenario, and the questioner asks the worrier, well, when do you want this? You say, right now. Because I don't think God has my interests sufficiently on his mind. Well, he did save you, so you say. And he has a plan for you, but you don't like it. God is going to do something about it. It is going to be final, and it will destroy those enemies, the people, the diseases, the weather, the politicians. It'll solve the school issues. It'll stop the riots. It will fix all of it. It's when Jesus himself returns bodily to this earth and establishes his kingdom in Israel, and then the situation will be like it was in the garden, where none of these things were. We think stranger danger now because somebody might come and breathe on us. Well, the real stranger danger is the stranger who has been alienated from the commonwealth. So were you once. Don't you remember that? You were alienated from the commonwealth. You were the stranger, and the danger was yours. And God drew you near, Paul says. You have been, look at verse 13. In Christ Jesus, you who were once far off have been brought near by the blood of Christ. And it was a costly and dangerous thing for that to happen. So you've been brought near, and that made Christ our peace. We misplace or we distort what concept of peace we want. We want personal and immediate gratification. We call that peace. I just want to be left alone. I just want things to be normal, whatever that means. I don't want things to be normal like they're normal in Somalia. I want things to be normal like they're normal here in East Fishkill. I don't want things to be normal like they are in North Korea. I want things to be normal like I'm used to from home, where mommy loved me and I got cookies every day and I slept in a bed at night and somebody tucked me in and sang a pretty song to me. I want that kind of normal. I want to feel good right now. When God says that Christ is our peace, and he reconciled us, that we are no longer strangers, and we don't think that's enough. So we need to change our mind about what is satisfying. and you become satisfied with what God has done, and you will be less concerned with what you think he hasn't done. In fact, you might even change your mind enough that you come into line with him all the way and begin to worry about the people who are fussing at you. And you're worried about them not because they're fussing at you, but because they are alienated and are in danger. And now you have compassion. And now you are going to love your neighbor as yourself. Just imagine if the church got that way. What kind of a world would we be in if Christians actually believed the Bible and followed it? So Christ, well, something happened. You've been brought near. Christ is your peace. You are no more strangers. That's that verse 19. Look at that. So then you are no longer strangers and aliens. You are fellow citizens with the saints and members of the household of God. Did you ever play a sport where you had, or a game, a party game, a kid's game? You know, you pick captains and all the rest of you are out there and you take your turn. Okay, I'm going to pick, and then this guy gets to pick, and I pick Nathaniel, and then I pick Ben, and I pick, what's your name? Donald. And who's the last one picked? You know, do you ever I was often the last one picked. You knew you were going to be the last one picked. And then you were worried which one was going to pick you. And when you got picked on the good team, well, boy, you're somebody special. You forgot that the guy that led the picking of the good team was obliged to pick you. He didn't want to pick you. He didn't want you on, still doesn't want you on his team. But he had to pick you because he's supposed to. Can't have somebody not pick. Well, verse 19, if you are no longer strangers and aliens, but you are fellow citizens with the saints and members of the household of God, if your head starts to swell up with how good you are, do you remember verse 12 or 11 that you were cut off? You were unwanted, unwelcome. God chose you, and it was not because of you. It was because he just loved you. And so we've been brought near. Christ is our peace. We should quit looking to this world. While you work and serve, go back to chapter 2, verse 7, so that in the coming ages he might show the immeasurable riches of his grace. He chose you, yes, but it was the immeasurable riches of his grace that did that. And that's what we're showing to the world, that they too can be saved. So quit looking to this world. Quit worrying about the weather, the politicians, the government, the diseases, the schools, the economy, or whatever it might be you're worrying about. Quit fussing about the world as far as what you're not getting. Instead, be concerned for them, because you have been shown the way and offered the way and been brought into the way to heaven, and you have been tasked with the responsibility to share that with somebody else. Do that, and I'll let you complain all day long about the weather. But you're going to come and talk to me about the weather, and you haven't spoken to anybody about Christ. I don't want to hear it. And you shouldn't want to hear it from me either. Circumstances do bring change. But when our concern is about the circumstances, we have forgotten that our hope is in the Lord. It's time to end. Ben?
Linda, we're going to switch the last one. It's pastor's fault. The last phrase he said was, "My hope is in the Lord." So we're going to sing that one. My hope is in the Lord. That is number 344. Number 344, if you want to use your hymnals. Stand with me. We're going to sing the first verse of this song to close out today. My hope is in the Lord, who gave himself for me, and paid the price of all my sin at Calvary. For me he died, for me he lives, and everlasting life and light he freely gives. Al, would you close us in a word of prayer?